I'm so honored to be here tonight with Doctors Strecher and Curt Thompson discussing such an important topic. How to live a meaningful, psychologically healthy, happy life is something I would guess matters to everyone here. It certainly matters for the society we live in, where in the United States alone, we have a $480 billion industry aimed at improving wellness. We spend tons of time and energy trying to make our lives better. We're early enough in the year that some of us may even have New Year's resolutions we haven't given up yet. And yet, despite our best efforts, the harsh reality is that being well doesn't seem to be something we're all that good at. So what do we do with that? I'm hoping the two of you can shed some light on that question tonight. But first, I'm curious how the two of you got started with this work in the first place. So, Curt, your work explores the intersection between neurobiology and Christian spiritual practice, among other things. To many, that may seem like an odd combination. So how did you develop an interest integrating those two fields?
Well, I think it begins with, having gone to medical school and psychiatric residency training, there is an obvious exposure that we have to people who have all kinds of challenges that come through your door that have a range of different experiences in life. At the same time, as a Jesus follower, I'm also asking the question, how do we think about what their experience is in a context of this particular anthropology? And to what degree does that anthropology inform the work that I do as I do that? I think we talk about this work of interpersonal neurobiology, which is, it's an emerging field that really takes into consideration anybody and everyone who has a stake in asking the question and answering, what is the mind? And what does a mind look like when it's actually flourishing? When I was in med school and residency, many psychiatrists would report this. We didn't have a single course, let alone even a single lecture on what the mind actually is, which is kind of scary to know that they then turn us loose to take care of people in the world. But the point is, this is an important question for us to ask. We're really easily able to name what is wrong with someone's mind. We can see when someone has a problem. But what does it mean for us to actually imagine and consider what it means for us to flourish? What are the things about the mind that need to be engaged such that that's the kind of life that we're living? And I would say that for me, there comes this intersection between what we read about from a biblical anthropology, or this notion of what does the Bible have to say, what does Christian faith have to say about what it means to be human, that speaks to this in a really meaningful way. It doesn't mean that no other worldview speaks to the question of what does it mean to flourish, but it speaks to it in a particular way that actually intersects with some important elements of the mechanics. For example, one thing having to do with the fact that we humans have a really hard time not telling stories. By the time you're 2, you have 2 to 3 words. By the time you're 3, you have 3 words. By the time you're 5, you're coming to Michigan. All right? This is what you're doing in order for you to make sense of the things that you're sensing. Well, what's the nature of the story that you're going to tell, and who are the people who are going to help you tell this? And the way that we tell stories is crucially important. And so therefore, the nature of the story that I actually believe that I'm living in as an individual, and who are the people who are helping me tell that, are going to shape how I actually approach and respond to the mechanics that are involved in that as well. And so in that sense, the story of Christian faith is significant in that it helps us have a way of applying what it means for us to be human to these mechanics of the neuroscience that we talk about with patients.
Great. Thank you so much, Curt. And Vic, you similarly come from a medical sort of public health background. What got you interested in something as psychological, or even some might say spiritual, as life purpose?
First of all, I would like to just thank Veritas for inviting me. I just feel very, very grateful for this invitation. Truly appreciate it, and really appreciate being here with both of you.
Right.
Actually, my background is as a behavioral scientist. In public health, people didn't know what public health was a few years ago. Now everybody does, and you either love us or hate us, but public health has always been somewhat of a contact sport where some people do not like you or other people do like you, but a lot of it relates to behavior. whether we get immunized or not, whether we quit smoking, what we do with our physical activity, whether we get a mammogram, et cetera. There's so many behaviors that are associated with public health. And I thought, well, this is fascinating. And we believe that roughly 50%, maybe more, of our longevity, of our disease is related to our lifestyles, to the decisions we make, to our behaviors. I thought this is a fascinating field to be in. And it's a very direct field in public health. We're not esoterically studying theories all the time. All of those have to relate to helping somebody. And so most of my work for the last, long time, since 1983, I'm old, has been very focused on the more traditional health behavior kind of areas like smoking or getting a mammogram or, getting an immunization, AIDS prevention. And it takes you around the world, very interesting career, and I'm very happy to have had it. 13 years ago, our younger daughter very suddenly and unexpectedly passed away of a heart attack. And when that happened, this obviously rocks your world. For me, my wife and I went to a therapist to get help. And I was really concerned actually about getting a divorce. I didn't want a divorce, but I had read that something like 80% of parents who lose a child end up divorcing. So I went in being the smart professor that I am and said, 80% of blah, blah, blah. And she kind of smiled gently at me and said, 50% of couples get divorces anyway. Oh yeah, I forgot about that. Bayesian statistics. So anyway, but she did say something interesting. She said, but if you start judging how the other person will grieve and say, well, you're grieving too much or too hard or doing this or taking this or whatever, you will break up. And this is a journey you have to take on your own, but you have to support one another. So my wife, who's an artist, started doing more artwork. I went to northern Michigan and started drinking myself to death and started eating myself to death and started watching everything on TV that had Kim Kardashian in, which is a sure sign that you're getting ready to die. And, but what I realized, in other words, I didn't care about anything. One morning, I woke up at 5 in the morning and I was right on Lake Michigan. It was ice cold outside. It was about 40 degrees, 45 degrees. And I noticed that the water was completely smooth. It was still dark out, but it was very smooth, you could tell. And I decided to just jump in my kayak and I went out about 2 miles in my boxer shorts and t-shirt. And I know that's too much information, but the idea is that I had no life preservation, nothing. It didn't matter to me. And it was cold. The water was like a Slurpee. If I'd fallen in, I would have died within a few minutes. So anyway, but I didn't care. And I was about 2 miles out, and I thought, maybe I'll just continue on to Wisconsin, which was 84 more miles. No problem. And obviously, I was at a crossroads in my life, and I was very seriously considering just continuing on. And the sun started coming up, and at that moment, I felt my daughter Julia in me. And I don't know how to explain that. I don't understand it. But I felt her in me, and I felt her saying, you've got to get over this. And it wasn't like you've got to get over this. It was like, you have to get over yourself. You have to get over your grief, and you have to fix yourself, or you're going to die. And you have a choice. And this agency of having choice suddenly, I could die, and it's my choice, or I could live. I could turn around. I decided to turn around, and I was still kind of dripping wet. Didn't matter. I just started looking down on myself as if I was sitting at the kitchen table, and I was looking down as if I was looking from the top of the ceiling, looking down, and said, you have to find a new purpose in your life, a new direction. Get a piece of paper out and write down the things that matter to you. And I had no idea what I was doing. I just simply got a piece of paper and I started writing down my family, my students, the things that mattered most to me. And I don't know why I did it. I just started writing these things down that I deeply valued. And I called the university by 10 o'clock, I had written down a whole bunch, and I called the university and said, "It's so nice of you that you let me stay up here and watch Kim Kardashian and drink a lot. But, the first thing that I need to do is go back and teach, and I'm going to teach every one of my students as if they're my daughter, Julia." And when that happened, my whole life changed. And I realized that I was repurposing my life, that I had a new purpose. And I started walking to work, because I have hundreds of students. So I walked to work every day. Not for me, but because I needed the energy physically to do that. I started eating better, so I'd have the energy to do that. I started working out more. I meditated every day. I don't allow myself an alcoholic beverage until I've meditated, so I'm a very good meditator. Anyway, I started doing research on this. And I don't mean to be long-winded, but this changed me a lot, obviously. So it's a very personal thing that happened to me that turned into something I wanted to do research on. And I will say this, I typically tell my students, don't do research on things that you're so intimately involved in, because it's hard to be, to stay away from the biases that you have. It's hard to look at that objectively. And here I'm doing exactly what I told my students not to do. But I'll tell you, it's been an absolute joy to be involved in a field like this now. And doing, studying with people like Thad Polk, a great neuroscientist, the neuroscience of purpose, the neuroscience of what happens when you write down your core values, the epigenetics of this, building applications to help people become more purposeful. And I've never found such response from audiences from around the world when we do this, when we help people find purpose. So that's the long-winded answer. Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing about that and just your personal story. We really appreciate that. I was interested in, while the two of you were talking, you both kind of in different words were mentioning like stories that sort of lead to life, or stories or purposes that lead to death. And I'm curious, Curt, in your work as a psychiatrist and an author, what have you found in regards to like the characteristics of the stories we tell? Which are the ones that lead to well-being and which are the ones that don't?
I think that, first of all, dude. So first of all, I'm just really sorry. And it doesn't really matter how long ago it was. It's just not the way it's supposed to be. So that's number one. And the second thing I want to say is that I'm really struck by how you are telling a story of how in your kayak you were telling a story and then somebody interrupted that. And you found yourself having a collaborator who's helping you tell your story differently. Yeah. And, one of the things that we talk about as human beings, I mentioned earlier, that at some point we begin to develop language, and our language is used for many different reasons, but one of the reasons that we use it is to help us make sense of what we sense. I like to say, in some respects, we would say this is an overly simplistic way of talking about how the mind operates. So we would say we sense things, newborns, infants, toddlers are sensing things, and eventually we begin to make sense of what we sense. But strikingly enough, we humans don't do a very good job of making sense if we think that we're supposed to do it by ourselves. Newborns, infants, they don't come up with words by themselves. Parents give them words. We are collaborative storytellers. And whether you know it or not, everybody here in this room, the story that we think that we're telling, we think we might be telling it by ourselves. I guarantee you that you are not. Even if the people that are most important to you are not in the room or may even be dead, they're still in your head. And we are telling our stories with each other in mind from the time that we're young until the time that we're dead. The real question is, who are the people who are in my life who are helping me tell my story most truly? Mm-hmm. And by truly, I don't mean truly like just according to the facts. I'm Curt, who was born and raised in Ohio. I just figured I would get that out of the way. And okay, wait. So I'm a Buckeye fan. Okay, listen. Look, I'm also a psychiatrist, and I suddenly am aware of all this insecurity that's just like everywhere in the room. But but I grew up at a time when if you're a Buckeye fan, you're still a Big Ten fan. So can I say, congratulations. Congratulations. Well done. Well done. And so I'm really pleased and proud of you all. I got paid a lot of money to say that. I'm not. Okay, so this notion that we tell a story about who we are. And when I don't just mean I'm telling a story about the facts. I'm born and raised in Ohio, and I went to medical school here and to residency here, and these are just the facts of my life. We're also wanting to ask the question, and this is where the Christian story is meaningful for me. What does it mean for me to tell my story faithfully? By faithfully, I mean, who is going to help ask me questions that will help me tell the story? It's not just a matter of like, do I have all the information about me? I can tell you I do not. It's not until someone else is asking me questions, like your daughter is asking you questions, however that mysterious event is happening, somebody else is asking me questions about what is it that I want? What is it that I'm afraid of? What is it that I'm most ashamed of? What are the places in my own story that I don't even know that I don't know, but that I'm burning energy behaving in a certain way as a way to keep those parts of my story out of the room, because I'm afraid that when they show up, you'll see them and you will go. And when you leave, I will have this experience of my amygdala taking off, my brainstem starting to fire, because I will be afraid of what we would consider to be an existential departure, like I'm not worthy of your presence, you're leaving. And most of us in this room would have very little conviction that our presence in the room is necessary for the life and flourishing of other people. But this whole notion of how we tell stories begins with who are the people that are surrounding me, who are helping me develop a story in which what comes out of it is a life of love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Those are words that St. Paul wrote, and he says, then there's no law against this. Like, how many people want to be with people who are loving and kind and joyful and so forth and so on? Who here doesn't want to be that kind of a person? But the real question is going to be, what are the things that we're doing, and who are the people that are helping me tell that kind of story together so that that's the kind of person that I can become? Most of what we would say, when we look at what walks into my office, and the entire panoply of diagnostic categories that walk into my office, in many respects, one of the things that they have in common is a degree to which they are living in a world in which they believe they are utterly alone. They're not, if you were to look at them, you wouldn't say they look like they're alone. In fact, most people, like if you're coming to the University of Michigan, like you got to be somebody to get here, which means you're working your tail off, which means people who look at you are thinking like, that cat, he's got it by the tail. Like he knows what he's doing. She knows what she's doing. Most people are not going to imagine that you're alone, but you do. And then the question becomes, who are the people who are in my life who are aware of that, to whom I can say that to so that I'm not as alone as I have been?
Beautifully put.
Thank you so much. I want to go real quick back to Vic, what you were saying about this sort of personal experience sparking this line of research. And I want to hear a little bit more about what you found, what you discovered about purpose and about the types of purposes that may help us lead to well-being in our own lives.
Sure. Well, and of course, this subject goes back over 2,400 years to a person who thought a lot about what makes us flourish, and that was a person named Aristotle. Aristotle, in fact, in his book Nicomachean Ethics, which I wouldn't recommend reading unless you really can't sleep. Well,
I'm going to take your advice, dude.
Yeah, it's a big, thick book. I did read it, and it took a long time. Anyway, he distinguished two kinds of happiness. One, well-being. One was what he called hedonic, and we all know about hedonism. And he said, that's okay. We all enjoy pleasure things. We are pleasure seekers by nature, so we enjoy good food or good wine or good sex or good vacations or good whatever those things are. We enjoy those things. And he said that is natural for us. But if that's all we are, and this is quoting from Nicomachean Ethics, he said, then we're like grazing animals. He said, if we are in touch with this inner true self, this true God, that in Greek it's called the daemon. And he said, if we're in touch with this true God that we're born with, almost like a guardian angel and a mentor, a guru inside of us. Hindus have this as well. They call it the Atman. But if we're born with that and we're in touch with that, then we become very, very deeply happy. He called this eudaimonia or eudaimonia, depending on who's telling you the story. But I think that's a really important distinction. And we might now call it transcending purpose. This idea, and Socrates once said the unexamined life is not worth living. Aristotle essentially said, yes, that's right, Socrates, but the purposeless life isn't worth examining in the first place. So what's a happy life? What's a well life? What's a flourishing life? It's to examine your life, but to examine a life of purpose and continually think about repurposing your life. Just as there are concentric rings on a tree, maybe you start thinking about, and first of all, it's a good metaphor to me, because the core of a tree, maybe when you're a child, it's important to have a purpose. Maybe if your family has a purpose of volunteerism or doing other things that are transcending your own self. You start building that strong core, just like a tree, and gradually those outer cores, anytime you need a Hallmark card, when you graduate, when you get married, if you have children, if you get sick, if you lose a loved one, if you retire, all these times are times that you may want to think about repurposing your life. People with stronger purpose live longer. We've done epigenetic research, which is our epigenome is kind of like this vinyl record sitting on top of this hard drive of our DNA, which is pretty hard to change generationally. But this vinyl record can be worn down, and people with stronger purpose have less wear and tear on that. They're more resilient to stress. They can put their arms in freezing cold ice water and hold it in much longer if they're asked to think about their purpose than if.
Wait, do you like run those experiments here at UM?
We actually do quite a few different kinds of experiments
involving
here.
people like that. I'm just curious, just checking, because I don't think they do that at Ohio State.
Yeah.
I call it kind of like sadistic. Never mind. I won't go there.
Yeah.
Okay.
You just can't help it.
No, I know. I have no impulse control. Okay.
No. People with strong purpose actually do have strong impulse control, and I know your purpose is very strong. We know that we're starting to learn more about the part of the brain, the region of the brain, when we think about our core purposeful values gets more active, and that seems to downregulate or inhibit activity in our fear center, this amygdala. So people with strong purpose have greater self-control. So I want to help people become more purposeful. I think that's important. It helps me organize my goals. It helps other people organize their goals. And I feel like that's getting at a root cause of all this behavior change stuff that I've been doing for so many years. I mean, one might even ask, if you wanted to start asking what your purpose is, anyone have a smartphone? Do you use smartphones here? Anyone? Okay, well, if you do have a smartphone, what's on the wallpaper of your smartphone? Is it, who has on the wallpaper of your smartphone, you turn it on, you have your family on there? Anyone? Raise your hand. How about their dog? Their cat?
That's weird. That's weird.
We have cat people there?
Yeah.
Sorry. Just kidding, cat people. Some people have themselves on it, right? Some people have a quote or saying. All I'm saying is that's maybe the beginning of a person asking, who are you? What do you value? What's your identity? And from that, maybe you start evolving a purpose. So I don't think this is rocket science. I don't think it's some esoteric science or philosophy. Now there is a deeper science to this. There are over 1,000 studies in this area, and we know a lot more about it.
Great, thank you so much. I have sort of a similar question for the two of you. So I imagine someone in the audience could be sitting, hearing all of this, thinking, yeah, it sounds great to have these collaborative storytellers who ask these questions, who help me live more truly into my life. And wouldn't it be great to have this clear sense of purpose? But for whatever reason, I feel like I'm in a stage of life where that is just not to be found. Yeah. So Curt, I'm curious about people who feel really lonely and don't feel like they can find sort of that good community that reflects their true identity back to them. What would you say to people who feel like they're in that position?
I think one of the first things that I would that I would appeal to, and this I think directly emerges out of a Christian anthropology, and that is it raises the question about teleology, like what is our purpose? What's our sense? Like, are we people who just showed up here, or are we creatures? Were we created? Were we made? And that whole notion, for instance, shapes things, because then that raises the question, well, what were we made for? And we would say that, we Christians would say, well, we were made to create and curate beauty and goodness in the world. That's what we were made to do. And if you look around, we have a really hard time doing that. We really have a hard time loving one another. We have a hard time being loved by one another. It's excruciatingly difficult to be a peacemaker. It's easy to commit violence. Excruciatingly difficult to make peace. Keeping peace isn't even the same thing, but making peace. So, for instance, then we get to places where when people are asking the question that you're offering, it presumes that I could give them an answer that they themselves would carry out and resolve that. And what I would invite them to consider is that nobody creates purpose all by themselves in an isolated chamber. I'm responding to something else that's going on in my world, in the same way that newborns and infants and toddlers don't find purpose all by themselves. It is something that they receive as part of being a community in the first place. And so I would be asking questions like, who are the people? Give me the names of 3 people, if you could, by whom you could say, if I were to talk to each of them together, there would be nothing about you that they don't know. Who are those people? And they might say, well, I don't have people like that in my life. Where can I find them? And I would say, these are relationships that we're going to need to make together. That my resolving my problem with loneliness is not a problem that I solve, it is a problem that we solve. It is because I'm going to make the assumption that for my brain, in order for it to flourish, it can't figure out the question of flourishing by itself. I'm going to need to have the presence of other people in the room because, in fact, when you look at whether you get God involved in this conversation or not, when you look at attachment research, you see that those children that grow up in places where they have secure attachment that develops, their brains, their middle prefrontal cortices are far more integrated in terms of the 9 different functions that the middle prefrontal cortex carries out. They're far more able to do this by the time they're 6 and 8 and 10 years of age when they have secure attachment. That's not just about what that single individual child is doing. That's about what is happening with them in the context of a community. That kind of life doesn't change when you're 20 or when you're 80. My deep need for connection with other people is part of how I'm going to allow them to ask me the kinds of questions that will enable my sense of purpose to emerge. Not unlike the conversation that you have in your boat with your daughter that evokes something for you that changes the direction of how you're telling that story in the first place. And this is what's really challenging when we live in a world that has for 500 years been training us to believe that each of us as individuals, should be able to come into the world and be able to be master of my universe without the help of anybody else. I should be able to pull myself up by my own bootstraps. And the reality is that human beings simply don't survive in that kind of a context.
I'm curious, real quick, do you feel, when you talk about sort of this communal nature of people, do you feel that a shared teleology is necessary? Do we have to agree on our idea of purpose to engage in sort of these mutually beneficial relationships?
Well, I think it's true that Vic and I don't share the same anthropology or worldview. I think that's true. I think it's true, as far as I know. But you're not saying anything. This is making me very nervous. Can you imagine? It's the psychiatrist who's nervous. This is not helpful for patients.
You seem nervous. Yeah. No, I think we differ a bit on this in that I think I'd mentioned in the past, I'm a fierce agnostic, meaning I don't know.
You're certain about not knowing.
I'm absolutely certain I don't know. And, well, it's funny because Socrates said, I know that I don't know.
Yeah.
There's one thing I know, and that's that I don't know.
Right.
Thomas Huxley came up with this word, agnostic, basically saying, I don't know. Doesn't mean you're an atheist at all.
Right.
I'm a fierce fence sitter.
Right.
I am but that does, a lot of people want to push me into the atheist side, which I think in and of itself, quite honestly, my opinion, is a belief. It's a belief that God does not exist. I don't know. We could be in a simulation. We could have, where there is somebody who is kind of pulling a lot of strings and putting us in a big board game. And one might actually call them God in a way, really.
Right.
Or I just simply don't know. I think I'm a little tiny ant in a gigantic football field, playing Ohio State, and we're running down the field, stomping on this team. And I'm just going, I don't know what's going on.
This is in your dream, right?
It is. It's
okay.
Fantasy.
Well, and so I would say, I think that I also feel like an ant at times, except that I believe that I'm loved.
Yeah.
So, and so like the Bible never really talks about what I know.
Uh-huh.
It talks about, do I believe that I'm loved? And so I, in the 45-minute call we had back, a couple months ago in our lovely dinner, in that short of time, I love being in the room with you.
Thank you.
And I have enjoyed sharing your company. Yeah. And so I think that now the question about whether or not we, what we know is true, it's kind of like asking the question, do I know that the cars are going to stay on that side of the road? Mm-hmm. I really only know that after they've gone by me.
Yeah.
I don't know this for sure. Mm-hmm. I'm trusting this. Mm-hmm. And the Bible talks an awful lot about trusting things as opposed to knowing things in the way that Newtonian physics might have taught us to think that we can know in that way. And so I would say that there are plenty of ways in which fundamentally we might have different responses to the question of, do you live as if Jesus was raised from the dead? Do you live as if that's true? And what kind of implication does that have? We might have different responses to that, but I don't for a moment believe that keeps us from differing on what we believe is true about the need for connection, the need for purpose,
right.
How, what we want to do in our communities to facilitate that. That would be my response to that.
I think if I can add to that,
yeah.
That's all right. I've used this metaphor of a tree, and I think the root system is our core values. And these core values generally don't change over a person's lifetime. There are certain, now you may kind of call on certain values over time. The tree, as it grows, might go through new purposes and new directions. It might organize the goals and behavior you have, which are kind of the branches, differently. I might still have a pleasure-seeking value that influences part of my purpose, saying I want to have a good time in my life too. And that might be a branch over here that says I want to have 3 old fashions rather than 1 old-fashioned cocktail.
And they were very good, by the way.
Excellent tonight. We just had 1. And if you start going down that branch, though, then you might end up with 3 old fashions. And then after that, you might get in an argument with your spouse or your family or whatever happens. Whereas if you start on a different branch, you might be better off. And so these purposes, I believe, help you start connecting with the right kind of goals you have, these branches, which over time, it's really hard to get to that part of the tree if you're on this branch.
Right.
But very importantly, I think where we really do connect, under that root system is a reservoir. And that reservoir of nourishment and water is something that we're all sharing. And we could call that water culture. I might call it culture. We could also call it religion, which is certainly inextricably linked with culture. It teaches us our core values. Friedrich Nietzsche, in 1800s, wrote, "Thus spoke Zarathustra," who basically, he said God is dead and we have killed him, an important statement. But he was basically saying the Industrial Revolution is killing God. What you're kind of also saying, in the last 500 years, we've seen, this, we're the center of the universe. Suddenly we're part of, 1 billion stars in this system. And there's 100 billion actually, and 100 billion systems, et cetera. I mean, we're tiny. And that's what he's kind of implying. And he said the hardest thing is to say maybe there isn't a God. Maybe we have to create our own values. Maybe we have to throw out. We have to be, he said in the beginning of Thus Spoke Zarathustra, we're like camels, and the camel says, load everything on me. Load all the sorrows of the world, the joys of the world. In other words, educate me completely. The camel then metamorphosizes into a lion. The lion goes into the wilderness, sees this dragon that on every scale has 2 words, thou shalt. In other words, what everybody is telling you should be believing. And he included religion in that. He included communities. He included the government. He included everybody else. And the lion slays the dragon. Says, no, I am my own self. And then one last metamorphosizing into, anyone know? A child. If you ever saw 2001 Space Odyssey, if you haven't, I'd highly recommend it. I know none of you even know what that movie is, probably, if you're under 30. But at the very end is this star child coming out, and guess what they're playing? Thus Spoke Zarathustra by Strauss. Right. Dun, 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 boom, boom, boom. And the whole idea, though, is that you are becoming a person fresh. Now, I actually have written about this, and I don't think you can. I think this reservoir under us, under our core values, is incredibly important. Where that reservoir comes from, whether there's, as Jung talked about, some sort of collective consciousness, whether it's the Force, and we believe in Star Wars, George Lucas, whether we are Catholics or whether we're Hindu or whatever, there is something I believe is underneath all of this. It's feeding this. And I do think it's bigger than ourselves. I just don't know what it is.
Right, and Christians, yeah, it makes total sense. And we Christians would say that we also don't know what it is in the sense that I'm not God, and therefore there's lots of things that I don't know. But I do know. I think the other thing that if you really do want to take Nietzsche seriously, Nietzsche now lives. Right, he lives in our world, right? He's in Ukraine and he's in Gaza, and he was in World War II, and all the things. This is what we get.
But I wouldn't say that. I'm hearing you, but I wouldn't associate Nietzsche with all the bad things in the world. Personally, I actually think Nietzsche was an optimist about the future of humanity, and in fact, it turned into the modern existentialist movement, where people said, maybe God exists, maybe it doesn't, but we have to make our own lives and our own cultures and our own society without necessarily a belief in a God.
Right, which is what the people who built the Tower of Babel said as well. We're going to build, we are going to become something.
And that's a story.
It is a story. And I'm just looking around at our attempts to do this, and I'm like, I look at my own life, and I look at my own capacity at being able to love people, and I'm not very good at it. And this is where I would say that what I long for is a rescuer. And this is where, when people say, well, do you believe in God? I say, I don't know that that's even a helpful place for me to start this conversation. I know that I believe in Jesus because I need a rescuer. Because I look around not just at the world, I look at my own life. I look at the lives that walk into my office, and I'm aware of how desperately we need the presence of other people who are willing to stay the course with us, no matter how bad we become.
So other people, right. I'm with you, 100%.
Yeah.
It's the Jesus part or the God part. I'm going, I don't know.
Right, and it's okay that you don't. And I don't know either in the way that you're talking about knowing. I'm just simply saying that I trust that that's the case, and that's made all the difference. As it has for lots of other folks.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm not anti-Christian or anti-religious.
Yeah.
It's funny, people who are more religious do have better health behaviors. So from a public health perspective, because religion gives you purpose, gives you a very strong transcending purpose. And so people they have better health behaviors, they live longer, and there's lots and lots of studies of that.
Yeah.
But if you put both purpose and religiosity into the same statistical model and predict these longitudinal arguments or outcomes, then purpose stays, suggesting that it's the purpose that is kind of the active ingredient in this, and maybe religion is giving you purpose. I would just suggest that you don't need religion to have a very strong, very transcending purpose.
Right.
And I think you're almost suggesting that without religion, we'd be doing horrible things. And the root of a lot of Christianity is original sin. But I think a lot of science is suggesting that we are actually born quite good. There's a lot of biology. Franz de Waal wrote this great book, The Bonobo and the Atheist, about how bonobos, humans, as their babies, will share toys. They are inherently good, whereas I think the idea of original sin runs counter to my belief. Hindus believe you're born with this Atman, this true God. The Greeks believe you're born with this daemon, this inner guru or counselor. I like that idea because it has a lot to do with how you educate people.
Right.
Do you try to beat the devil out of you?
Right.
Educate the devil out of you? Or do you try to enhance and encourage that inner God-like self? Now, Thomas Merton, the famous Catholic theologian, said we are born with a true God. But that kind of defies what a lot of Christianity, to me anyway, the way I was taught in Sunday school, because I was brought up as a very strict Missouri Synod Lutheran Christian.
Right. Well, so fortunately, which is why most of us Christians would say when you really start talking about following Jesus, you're not really talking about religion in the first place. Like that's a misnomer. And when you talk about Augustinian theology of, original sin, that kind of cuts out half of the experience of the Christian faith tradition in the world.
But does it change should it be morphing all the time like that?
Well, I don't know that it's...
Part of Christianity is tradition and going back historically to truths.
Right. Well, part of everything is tradition, right? Part of science is tradition. And science, in many respects, as Polanyi once said, right, there's no such thing as science. There are only scientists.
So I'm hearing a lot of really...
We're having fun here.
Yeah.
A lot of really interesting tensions between your two sort of faith perspectives. And I do want to give us some time to transition into question and response, as I'm seeing that people are already asking lots of great questions along the lines of what you were starting to talk about. So as a quick reminder, you can continue to submit your questions through Slido or ask questions at the microphone in the aisle. Just to start off, a question for you, Curt. So you talk about the importance of community and specifically in your faith view, Christian community. And there's a question here talking about for people whom the Christian church and the Christian faith community has been sort of detrimental to their well-being. So specifically sexual minorities who have experienced homophobia in Christian communities. What does that Christian faith and community have to say to those individuals?
Yeah. Well, again, I think it's really important. First of all, Leslie Newbegin once famously said that no matter what religious experience we're talking about, human beings have never been more committed to the creation and the maintaining of empire than they do with their religion. Christian, Hindu, Muslims, it doesn't matter. That our sense of who we are, we most robustly throw out our chests when we do that. And so I think it's fair to say that when it comes to this question of God and power and transcendence and all the things that we long for, it's a thing that we, of course, long for because we want to be different. We want to be people who love well, We want to be people who are kind. We want to be people, all those things. And as I said earlier, I look at myself and I'm easily not very good at those things. And so it's not really surprising that when people come into a church where we're all working really, really hard to be good, and we recognize pretty quickly that we're not very good at being good, that the people who are most vulnerable get caught in that crossfire. And it doesn't really matter if you're a sexual minority or if you're females or if you're, throughout the course of history, those kinds of things happen because we're human beings, not because we're religious. And so I would also say, it's not just a matter of Christian community, it's a matter of like, who have been the people who have hurt you? Christian community didn't hurt people. Christian community is it's an abstraction. I want to know who the names are of the people. And I want to know what's been done to help you heal from that. And I want to know what it has been like for you to have to work to forgive those folks. And by forgive, I don't mean trust them. To forgive doesn't mean they're okay. I want to know who have been the people who've come to rescue you from whoever these people have been. Christians, non-Christians, whoever they happen to be. None of that's okay. And the real question again is, are we able to be the kind of people who will walk with those who have been wounded? Because the Jesus of the Gospels is the one who would come to those who have been wounded and say, I'm going to be with you because I know what it means for somebody to hang me on a gibbet for 6 hours in the day until I'm dead. And am I longing to have someone who can come and be with me who I know knows what it means to suffer? Or do I simply want somebody who can come with me from a position of power to try to figure that out? And we believers would say that if someone is going to come for me, I want someone who knows what it's like for me to live in the hell I've been through, even if it's been at the hand of the people who claim that they love you.
Great. Thank you.
Nicely said. Powerful.
And then a question for Vic. So when we think about purpose coming from a worldview without God or agnostic to the existence of God, where do we sort of derive that purpose from? What does it look like to sort of, as you were saying, create your own purpose?
Yeah, well, I think that education does that. Traveling around the world. I think about my students who very often, by the way, I don't think that a person who is a student has to have a purpose and direction in their life immediately. In fact, if they aspire to find their core values and find their purpose, that to me is a very positive move forward. And I suggest that they take a gap year or two and don't just go to Paris or London or whatever, but go to Sub-Saharan Africa or go to other places, volunteer your time, learn about how the real world works, very much as you were talking. Understand how people die, maybe work in a hospice, understand how different kinds of cultures work. The more you do that, the more you are an effective camel, Nietzschean camel, where you are learning how to be this lion that can say, I'm going to build my life the way I want to build it. My life is a continuous project where I will continually try to understand the world, understand myself, build new purpose, new goals, and continue to evolve as a human being as best I can. And that may involve finding a religion as well. But I do think that religion can give you a basis for very positive core values. But I like the idea. I like people who have gone through life and discovered and found a transcending way of living regardless of a religion.
And kind of going off of that, I'm curious, maybe both of you can speak to this question of, do people therefore just believe in religion because it brings them fulfillment? So you're talking about the statistical model with religion and purpose in there. Is religion just a means of obtaining, one of many means of obtaining that purpose and happiness and fulfillment? Maybe Vic, if you want to speak to this first.
Well, I think Christianity, being raised in that faith, I certainly understand the core values of that religion, and I think those core values are, as you said, you marked them off. These are core values that are incredibly positive. They build character, they build strength, and so I think that's a very positive thing. I think you can like I said, I think you can use religion to become a more purposeful and happier person. Yes.
And Curt, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think what's tricky for me is the assumption that we are kind of, like the question's being framed as an enlightenment question. Mm-hmm. The question's being framed as if religion is, it's like, do we need to take psychology here at the University of Michigan in order for us to have a good life? Can't we have a good life if we take a number of other subjects? And we who follow Jesus would say, Jesus actually is the president of the university. He's not one of these topics. Religion isn't one of these topics. If we were in first century Palestine, these kinds of questions would make no sense to people. But we live in a world now where, with science, this thing that we call spirituality or spiritual life and so forth, it's been presumed that the more we can measure things, those things that are in the material world that we can measure, anything that we call spirituality are those things that get pushed further and further and further to the margin that we can't.
See what you're saying. Yeah.
And because I can't measure that, okay, that's okay. But then this becomes a way for me to categorize, and religion becomes one more thing that I study, one more element of things. And I would say certainly people have various and sundry kinds of religious experience. And yet at the end of the day, you're still asking questions of where did it all come from? What's the purpose? What gives you ethics? Those kinds of things. And where we would say, where we followers of Jesus would say, it's not really about like values. Like, though I don't take my value from value, I have my value from a person. Mm-hmm. That my values come from this experience of being loved, not my experience of being given a set of things that I know that are right or wrong to do, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. I think that to tap into something you said earlier in that response, I think we agree on something around spirituality. I can't stand the dichotomy between, quote, natural and supernatural. Mm-hmm. You know, spiritual is supposedly somehow not nature. I think it's all nature. If there is a God, that God is part of our nature. We may not be able to measure that God at the moment through our instruments. Well, heck, we couldn't measure a whole bunch of things just 100 years ago.
Right.
So why do we think that suddenly, why do we continue this, to me, a false dichotomy?
Yeah.
I do want to measure. I do think we should be able to measure things. Maybe right now we can't measure angels. Maybe we can't measure a God. Maybe in the future we will be. I don't want to call that, I don't want to push spirituality off in the corner, to the side.
Yeah.
I agree with you.
Yeah.
And Vic, going back, we have another question about purpose. So you talked about the importance of purpose. Does it matter what kind of purpose a person decides to live
Yes.
with? Particularly, we're sort of creating our own purpose.
Well, this idea that I was talking about, hedonic purposes, where we might desire material goods. In fact, there's a wonderful study that was done about 10 years ago looking at college seniors. And they followed them for 2 years after, but first they asked them, what matters to you? What are the things that are important in your life? And about half of them said, I want to make a lot of money, and I want to be popular, and I want to be attractive, and all these very hedonic kinds of purposes. And then the other group said, I care about community, social interactions, things like that. They followed them. 2 years later, they found that the group who had the more eudaimonic or transcending purpose had more well-being, whereas the group who had more hedonic purpose, by the way, both of them achieved their goals. The hedonic purpose, people made more money. They, et cetera. But they had far more ill-being, both physically and mentally. So when we talk about well-being, we have to be very careful about the kinds of purposes we pick. Yeah.
Great.
Can I respond to that?
Of course.
So this would be an example of when I hear that, the writer of the book of Ecclesiastes, for some of you may be aware that there's an Old Testament and a New Testament of the Hebrew Bible, and there's the book of Ecclesiastes, and in the 3rd chapter, in the 10th verse, the writer says, Everything will become beautiful in its time. He makes all things beautiful in its time, for he has placed eternity in their hearts. And the Hebrew for the word eternity is not just referring to a measurement of time. It's referring to a measurement of the quality of life that God lives. This notion that when we talk about purpose, we would say, when you look at 3-year-olds, you don't have to train them to do this. 3-year-olds at some point, anybody here have had 3-year-olds in your house? This is sometimes, they drive you crazy. But when they're not driving you crazy, they will run into, you've had 3-year-old, they run into your kitchen and they're holding things. And they've made something for you. Yes? And they give it to you and they expect you to put it on your refrigerator and charge money to the neighbors to have them come see it. Because they think this is so beautiful. They make stuff. Because this is what we are made to do. You come here and you create things as students. You're creating, prolifically creating things.
As are you.
And this notion of longing, this notion of eternity, is expressed in this deep longing for us to make artifacts of beauty and goodness in the world, including relationships, including nuclear energy power plants, including gardens, including studies that help us learn how purpose is such a big deal for us. And so I think I would suggest that, of course, it would make sense that people who are paying attention to eudaimonic purpose are going to live more effectively in the same way that we would say people who are going to exercise in ways that the body is made to be exercised are also going to flourish more effectively. That's a different question than asking the question, why is the person on the earth to flourish eudemically and exercise physiologically in the first place? That's a different set of questions altogether. And we would suggest those are questions that the relationship with Jesus does claim to answer, that we have a God who has so loved us that he wants us to be people of goodness and beauty who have purpose, who are repairing ruptures, even are learning to forgive those people who have treated us badly, but that we can't do this by ourselves, which is why we need professors like you to help us do this.
You're kind.
Going back to an earlier point that Vic made about humans being innately good, one of the Slido questions was asking Curt for you to respond to this, and particularly thinking about this coming from both sort of a Christian worldview and a scientific background.
Yeah, well, it's a great question, and again, a lot of my brothers and sisters, people of faith, think that the Bible only begins in the 3rd chapter of Genesis. Now, I don't know how many of you know about the Bible. Anybody here know about the Bible? Know much about the Bible? Right, so the Bible begins actually in the beginning. I don't know if you know this or not. The Bible does not begin with original sin. The Bible does not begin in the Garden of Eden. The Bible begins on the first page, and God's making stuff, right? The writers of the Hebrew Bible are brilliant. But what do they tell us that God is up to? He's an artist. They don't tell us that he's all powerful. That's not the point. The point is he's an artist, and he gets to the end of the first page of the Bible, and what does it say? That he's made humankind in his image in order for us to be like him, which means what? We're made with the purpose of being artists. And then you get to the second page of the Bible, and you get this sense of the man and his wife were naked and unashamed. You get this sense of how we do this. We are differentiated, and we're linked. We're different. You with me? We're differentiated and we're linked.
I'm loving it.
We're differentiated and we're linked. And the whole notion of being naked means that we are vulnerable. And to be vulnerable isn't just about our physical nakedness. It is about the fact that we human beings are the only creatures on the planet that have to clothe themselves in order to survive. Now, there are some people who put clothes on dogs. This is weird. And then they put these dogs in strollers. I was in LAX, and there they were in a stroller, a dog in a stroller. The dog did not ask for the extra coat. The dog is hot. But we have to put clothes on ourselves because I need you to protect me and I need you to help me. This is what the Hebrew sense of vulnerability is all about. To be naked is to need you to create things. I would much rather make stuff with people who think like me, act like me. I told people, I've been married for 37 and a half years to Phyllis. Oh, you're going to clap. You don't even know her. Thank you very much. Thank you for that. Right. And I told people, like, I got married, and, like, I don't know, it's like 6 weeks, 6 months later, like, you discover, I didn't want to marry Phyllis. I wanted to marry me. I wanted to marry someone who thought like I thought, who knows what the proper time is to go to the movies.
Are you on your smartphone? Are you?
Dude, I just wanted me to look like her. I don't want to because it takes so much work to work with someone who is that differentiated. But I need you, I need my African-American friends, I need my Asian-American friends, I need people who are in different demographics from me, because I need you to protect me, and I want to protect you, and I need your help. But the man and his wife were naked, and they were unashamed, and the Hebrews had lots of different words that they could pick from. They could have been naked and happy, because I'm sure they were. They could have been naked and confident. They could have been naked in a lot of different things. But there is nothing like shame that we Christians would say evil wields, and we humans wield. There's nothing like shame in the world that we use more effectively to our own destruction. We do it to ourselves, and we do it to ourselves until we've had enough of it, and then we start to share it with other people. And this whole notion of purpose eventually shows up in the 3rd chapter of Genesis, and even that causes us to forget that there were 2 pages that came first. And I need people like Vic to help me remember that long before the 3rd page of the Bible showed up, there were 2 pages that preceded it. Are you with me? And we need people in our lives who will invite us to do that same thing as well.
Thank you so much.
Dude.
So we're wrapping up the night here, and you've both given us these beautiful broad visions about what well-being might look like in your own different perspectives. So before we go, I'm curious what one actionable thing each of you would suggest for someone here today wanting to improve their well-being. So maybe Curt.
Yeah, I would say I would love for you to name, in order to answer this question, a month from now, I would love, if I could have a conversation with you, I would love for you to come to me and say, here are the names of the 2 people who I asked, and they willingly allowed me to tell them my story from beginning to end, the good, the bad, the ugly, in order for the parts of me that I hate the most to come into the room, in order for them to demonstrate that they weren't leaving the room when I did. Because I will tell you that when those parts of you that you don't know even, are more deeply known, you will begin to have a sense of what it means to be loved like you've never been loved before. Most of us don't know what it means to be loved because we are working so diligently to keep the parts of ourselves that we worry about, that we hate the most, that we don't want anyone else to see. We are working really hard to keep those in seclusion. And I will tell you that is energy that you are burning to keep them in seclusion, that you then do not have available to create the beauty and goodness in the world that you were destined to create, that we Christians would say, from before the world's foundation. And that is something I want for you to be doing. And so, who are the 2 people that you're going to begin to think about, and within the next week you're going to ask them? I would like to tell you my story. Would you be willing to sit with me for 30 minutes and let me do that?
Thanks, Curt. And Vic?
2, hopefully quick. The first is, especially the students out there, think about taking gap year if you can. And think about taking gap year where you learn about how people who are very different from you live. I was giving a talk just pre-COVID at Brigham Young university. And one thing that impresses me about the Mormon religion is this idea of going out into the world and doing something and learning something.
Yep.
They come back different. They come back very different. And I think that's a very special tradition. And I think that's something that I would encourage people to do. The second is to, when you get back home, maybe sometime later this week, draw a tree and say, you know, what's in the cross-section of that? What is my purpose now? What has it been in the past, maybe? Do I have a purpose? But go back, maybe more importantly, to the roots. What are the things that matter most to me, my core values? You may ask, too, where is that reservoir coming to feed those values? Are there other parts of that reservoir you might want to learn from? And then finally, ask yourself how this purpose, this tree trunk, influences the branches, the behavior on your tree. And how does it help you make decisions and help you organize your life in a way that is more satisfying? When you're doing that, you're no longer focusing on what Kim Kardashian is wearing or what this social media person said that pissed you off, or all those things that distract us in life. And we're more distracted than ever. I've seen my students in the last 10 years they've been more depressed than I've ever seen them in my entire career. There's a recent survey, this Healthy Mind survey that was originally created at Michigan, but it includes over 185 colleges and universities, that has found that depression rates have literally tripled over the last 15 years. It scares the crap out of me. I'm so afraid of this. I see so many of my students depressed, having a hard time in their lives. We've seen students hospitalized, seen, unfortunately, some suicides. And I think that we are lost as a culture. I think religion can help you figure out and organize those goals better. I think Christianity is one of those that can help you do that. I think having a purpose helps you do that as well. So I would think about doing those things.
Great. Curt, Vic, thank you so much for this discussion tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.